trouble just let me be, please.
Walk through this world with me. Go where I go.
Evening, and welcome to Talk of the Stacks. I'm Christy Pearson with Friends of the Hennepin County Library. Thank you all so much for joining us on this beautiful evening for another fascinating author talk. But first tonight, we are going to begin with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that in Hennepin County, we live and work on the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Dakota people. Today, the effects of colonization and oppression are felt by our indigenous communities. And by offering this acknowledgement, we commit to recognizing indigenous nations and to the ongoing work of reconciliation. Thank you. Well, I would next like to recognize our wonderful sponsors who help make this free series possible. LSC Architects, Ice House, Noor Companies, and the Minnesota Star Tribune. So let's give them a hand. Well, tonight we are thrilled to have with us the best-selling author, Georgia Hunter. Her latest novel is One Good Thing, which she's going to be talking about a little tonight. But first, please join me in welcoming Hennepin County Library Director Scott Dimstra to the talk.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the warm greeting. And as Christy shared, I'm excited to be here tonight to share a special surprise with you. This past fall, the Friends created a video to let you know more about the critical library programs nurtured by library friends like all of you. We're thrilled to continue its rolling world premiere here tonight at its first appearance at Talk of the Stacks. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the world premiere of the Friends of Hennepin County Library video.
Friends of the Hennepin County Library is the nonprofit partner of our nationally acclaimed library system, which has 41 libraries. We focus on career development, youth development, outreach into our community, and of course our beloved collection. What Friends does is brings these library spaces to life in new ways and allows more patrons to take part in the programs and services that our library is delivering.
When you think of a library, you think of it as a very quiet, silent place, and it's anything but that. No day is the same, but every day you hear a positive story about the role that we played in someone's lives. When you walk through our doors, you can see the impact of the programs supported through the Friends of the Hennepin County Library. It's truly an emotional experience when you think about the positive impact. We would not be able to do the work and fulfill our mission without the financial support of the Friends.
So our goal with Let's Read is to be able to provide structured support for our K through 5th grade learners. More than half of our students increase their literacy level, with some of those increasing all the way up to grade level. Being able to open up a world of possibilities for them with reading is the best thing that we could be offering our kids. The Friends have really made all of those things possible.
Hennepin County Library's outreach department serves anyone who experiences some sort of barrier in accessing library services. Shelter Collections is a program that goes out into about 19 different shelter and drop-in spaces. Friends of the Library allows us to purchase thousands of books per year to put into the hands of people experiencing homelessness directly.
The goal of this program is to build community with teens here downtown, to encourage them to be creative through technology. It's a bunch that you can do here in the Teen Tech Center. Me growing up, I didn't have a space like this. It's a safe spot, gives them an outlet. A lot of them say that this is their second home. To me, it's just an amazing place to be.
The first day I attended homework help, it was in the 3rd grade. I never stopped coming ever since 3rd grade all the way to 12th grade, which is now my senior year. Hooray. It's a very nice, safe, comfortable place for anyone.
Homework help is free after school. We work with any student. Best part is the kids. The kids are fun. Alex and I have been working together for 10 years. We started with like basic math, multiplication, and now we're talking about jobs, talking about college, and it's been a journey, you know.
We are one of the premier library systems in the country. That needs to be sustainable over time. I hope that we can continue our outreach, continue to serve the communities, and I hope that we can continue to provide a safe place for all of us in our community to come and dialogue openly, to share our views and ideas, and most importantly, to continue to explore our individual passions, our individual dreams.
I've been doing this job for a number of years now, and every single time I can say that I walk into a library, I see a different way that someone's connecting with staff, who's connecting with a patron, and it makes me truly proud.
The library should be a place where we come and we know that there's hope, that there is a future for us, and that we all matter. Those are some things that I know I've learned, and I hope we continue to recognize the importance of libraries in our lives.
I've seen it quite a bit. It usually gets me every time, though. Alex is my favorite in there, and he's such an extraordinary individual, attending homework help and making a real connection with his lead tutor as well. And so you see the innovative, forward-thinking programs that happen every day at our libraries. And at a time when you need it the most, your library is there for you and for your neighbors as well. And so tonight, I'd like to thank all of you for your ongoing support for our library. So please give yourself a round of applause for the support that you bring as well. And if you're not a friend, you can become a friend of the library. Please check with the Friends staff in the lobby after the talk, or click on the link in your event follow-up email that you're going to receive tomorrow. And now, it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's guest of honor. Georgia Hunter is the best-selling author of We Were the Lucky Ones, the incredible true story of a Jewish family separated at the start of World War II. This beloved debut novel has sold more than 1 million copies and was adapted for TV last year by Hulu as an acclaimed limited series. Hunter's latest book, One Good Thing, returns to the same historical era of and tells an unforgettable story of courage and resilience. Following the journey of two best friends through Nazi-occupied Italy, the novel is a remarkable tale of friendship, motherhood, and survival. Of the new book, critics have raved. One Good Thing is a rare second novel that surpasses all expectations. Once again, Georgia Hunter proves herself to be a remarkable storyteller who brings to vivid life a group of ordinary people living through extraordinary times. Here to celebrate the release of One Good Thing, please join me in welcoming the extraordinary Georgia Hunter to Talk of the Stacks.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Christy. Thank you, Rob. Thank you all for being here. This library is amazing. I feel like you can feel the energy of a place and a community when you walk into a room, and I felt that tonight meeting some of you. So I really appreciate the warm welcome, and this is my now official second week on the road talking about this book, and I'm so excited to share a little bit with you tonight about the inspiration behind it, the research behind it. And I've actually not yet presented my slides, so you guys are the first to see some of my pictures from my travels and my research. I'm thrilled to be here. This is my second novel, as Scott mentioned. We Were the Lucky Ones was based on my family's story and a discovery at the age of 15 that I came from a family of Holocaust survivors. That discovery set me off on a decade-long mission to unearth and record that story. And so by the time the book came out, I felt like a changed person. I had come to know my roots and my ancestry. It was in every sense a passion project. So when my editor at Penguin called and said, okay, so your first one's out, what's next? I really had to pause and think about it. I honestly hadn't yet thought of myself, I don't think, as an author, even though I had this book that was out. I was the granddaughter who set off on this epic, research project. And so I thought long and hard about where I wanted to allot my head space and my heart space, because I knew if I was lucky enough to be able to write a second book and to be able to be talking about it, I was going to live with that story for a long time. And my head and my heart kept bringing me back to Europe and to the Second World War and to the untold stories of the Holocaust. And I landed in Italy for a couple of reasons. First, for me personally, I felt like Italy's Holocaust history was fuzzy in my mind. Like I didn't really have a grasp of what had happened there. I remember learning a bit about Eastern Europe and certainly Poland, where my family was from, in my studies in high school, but Italy felt quite vague. And I don't know about you all, but I loved the idea of digging into the research and trying to bring that history to life through the eyes of a young, ordinary woman who's living it sort of firsthand. I was also drawn to Italy for a very personal reason, and that is the fact that my parents met there in the 1970s. I love these photos so much, and I have so many. I had like 17 pictures of them in Rome in the 70s, and my mom was like, that's too many, you need to pare it down to 2. They were both American and living there for totally separate reasons. My mom, Isabel, was running a clothing shop, and she was importing these incredibly cool jackets from Turkey that she saved none of for her unborn daughter at the time. And my dad was actually an actor and a director and a writer. I don't know if anybody's heard of a spaghetti Western, but it was the Italian version of the Westerns. So he was in about 17 of them. And that was what he was up to. And they met through the expat community and fell in love and stayed for a decade and a half of combined years in Rome and fell in love with the city too. And in the summer times, they either took their camper van out for a long weekend somewhere within an easy drive, or what I'm still trying to wrap my head around how they managed to do this, they started a little restaurant in a tiny town called Sperlonga on the Mediterranean, sort of halfway to Naples. It's this little whitewashed village, and they had been going in the summer times and fell in love with it, but when a restaurant came up for sale or for rent, I don't know how exactly it happened, but my mother raised her hand and said, I would love to try to do this. And she says that she went out and bought The Joy of Cooking and then ran the restaurant, knowing very little about cooking. But it was a hit. And on the far right, you can see my dad painting the sign for the trattoria, which they called La Savannah, which is named after the town where he was born in Georgia, which is also how I got my name. So I grew up hearing stories about life in Italy and the food and the culture and the people and the scenery, and so it held a very near and dear place in my heart. So I knew that Italy was going to be my setting. I had also traveled quite extensively in Italy. Here I am at, I think, age 2 and maybe 15 at the Trevi Fountain. And I'm the type of person with a bucket list about a mile long. I want to see the world, I want to explore, and yet Italy is a place I continue to go back to over and over and over again, whether it was my parents bringing me as a child or spending my semester abroad in Rome. It's a place that I adore and I hopefully will continue to go back to over and over again. So I dove into my research, kind of blindly at first, and learned quickly that the history of Italy's Holocaust and World War II was very confusing. It had so many twists and turns in terms of leadership and legislation and military tactics. It was very compared to at least what was happening, especially in Eastern Europe, there was a lot of gray area, and there were so many twists and turns, and I had to really spend a lot of time trying to keep track of it all and understand it all. And in the meantime, also remind myself as I was writing Lily's story, my protagonist is Lily, that confusion and that murkiness and those changes of what was happening around her were also very much a part of her worldview. So it was actually okay to try to communicate that in her narrative. The book opens at the end of 1940, and at this point the war hasn't yet come to Italy, but there's this sense of growing anti-Semitism. If you were Jewish and living in Italy, there was a set of laws that had been instilled in 1938 called the racial laws, and this is a headline announcing them in November of 38, and Mussolini had declared that there is a pure Italian race and that the Jews do not belong to it. So this was sort of mirroring the Nuremberg laws happening in Germany, where little by little, even though the Jews of Italy were completely assimilated and probably wouldn't have thought of themselves as one or the other, Jewish or Italian, but both, their rights were little by little being taken away. So they were allowed, the first thing that happened was children were kicked out of the schools. Jewish teachers were removed from their jobs. You weren't allowed to be a doctor or a lawyer. You weren't allowed to marry someone not in the Jewish faith. You weren't allowed to hire someone. You weren't allowed to move money out of the country. You weren't allowed to even join the army. So little by little, these laws were chipping away at their basic rights. They were also asked to, they were forced in a census to come report their names and their addresses. And if you were Jewish, again, early on in the early war days, your passport was stamped with a big red mark that said, "of the Hebrew race." So your name and your address and your race, which according to Mussolini, you were not a part of the Italian race, you were marked. And meanwhile, the headlines started to grow more and more anti-Semitic. There's some, if anybody can read Italian here, enough with the Jews. Jews are national pests. They are our #1 enemy. So you have this kind of growing sense of polarization in the country, anti-Semitism. The press, by the way, is controlled by Mussolini, so this is the message that he's putting out. And yet, life somehow went on. So if you were a young Jewish woman like Lily, you would feel the world kind of closing in around you. But unlike in Poland, where my family was, where life changed on a dime from one day to the next. You know, Poland was invaded in the beginning of September of 39. A week later, it fell. And if you were Jewish living under Nazi occupation, your life was almost immediately at stake. Or at least you were evicted from your home. You were put into a ghetto. The ghetto was liquidated. And it was bad news right away, right? In Italy, it was a much slower build to that moment. But it did come, and that came in 1943 when Germany did finally invade Italy. And they took over the center and the north, and the Allies came in up through the south. And this is when, unfortunately, most of Italy's Jewish population lived up in the north. And if you were Jewish and under German occupation, you were in trouble. And your choices were to either try to wait it out, you could maybe try to flee to Switzerland, you could perhaps convert to Catholicism, you might try to attain a false identification so that the Germans didn't know that you were Jewish. Lily and Esty are living their normal lives until this day that the Germans come in. And I just want to show you one more slide here, which I found so surprising in my research that I never thought of Italy as a place with camps or prisons, but this is designating all the places where they rounded up Jews. And by the way, it wasn't just Nazis rounding up Jews, it was also the fascist police, Mussolini's men, and sending them off to concentration camps like Auschwitz in the East. So for Lily and Esty, their lives then eventually do turn, and they have to decide where to go and what to do. And so what I had to decide was, how do I tell this story? And one thing that I thought about long and hard was, what are the real events? What was happening in Italy? Who were the real people, the real events, the places that I think that moved me or that seemed interesting to me and important to the history of Italy's Holocaust story that I could try to weave into Lily and Esty's story. I'll just mention that Esty is her best friend from university. Esty's a couple of years older and she's Greek, and I thought it would kind of be an interesting way through Esty's eyes to weave in the history of what was happening in Greece too. So I'm going to walk you through a little bit of the places that they go without trying to give away too many boilers. But the friends meet at a university in Ferrara, which is in the north, so you can kind of see here. Up here in the north. And there is a university there. And I first read about Ferrara in a book called The Garden of the Finzi-Contini. Has anybody read that? Yeah. It's a beautiful novel sort of about this time period and what it was like to be Jewish in this city. It's also a city that's had like one of the only cities that's had an uninterrupted Jewish presence from like the Middle Ages to today. I was drawn to it for its natural beauty. Here's a picture of what it looked like then. And for its size, I felt like sort of similar to the town of Poland, where my family was from, Radom, which a lot of people hadn't heard of. Ferrara is a place that most people probably haven't visited on their travels, on their tourists. It's not on their bucket list, but I kind of liked that it was a place that any of us could live. It felt like a very livable little village. This is what it looks like today. This is the old Jewish quarter. It's a beautiful medieval town. This on the right is me at the door to one of the city's synagogues. And one of the things I really loved about the city is that it's protected, or was protected, by these big walls that were actually wide enough to walk on and to bike on. So that was really interesting. My sweet mom, Isabel, came with me on all of my Italy research travels. So she and I rented bikes one day and rode around the walls where Lily and Esty, they have memories of putting out a picnic blanket on these walls during their university days and having a bottle of Chianti and a baguette. I really wanted to set the scene of what life was like before everything kind of turned upside down. It's also home to a great little restaurant called Al Brindisi, which apparently is the oldest in the world. And we enjoyed a nice dinner there, but this is the place where I decided that Esty and her husband would celebrate their engagement. So whenever there was like a real place or an element of the setting that I was drawn to or impressed by, not even necessarily like a big monumental moment in history, I would try to weave that into their story. Another place that they visit is called Nonantola here, just to the west of Ferrara. And this was a place I was drawn to for a couple of reasons. One, it is tiny, so it's the type of little village where everybody knows everybody. I love how it looks exactly like it did. I mean, that's such a quality of Italy too, right? And a lot of places in Europe compared to here, where you walk the streets and you look at the pictures from what it looked like 100 years ago or longer, and it looks very similar. So this was a small town where everybody knew everybody, and it was home to this villa called the Villa Emma. And this villa during the war was secretly housing over 70 young Jewish orphaned children. And the townspeople knew about them, and they just kind of existed. They were there. They would go to the movies, and the people, I read so many accounts of like, well, you would see them down by the river, like sharing a kiss, or like we'd have to wrangle them after the movie to get them. They're just kids, and it's heartbreaking, as it was, to know that most of them their parents had been taken away or killed. They were in this sort of safe place, being protected by this group called De La Sem. This all changed, of course, when the Nazis came in, and the townspeople got word that the Germans were coming about a day in advance. It happened quickly. And when I read the story of what happened and how this group of volunteers who was protecting these children heard that this invasion was imminent, likely by morning, there would be Germans walking the streets, and there's no chance that this villa would go unnoticed. Like 72 children, people knew about them, and there was no secret. They went in the middle of the night, brought all the children out of the villa, and started knocking on doors. And every single townsperson whose door was knocked on opened their door and took in a child. And so I was so moved by that courage and that generosity that I knew Lily and Esty would come into contact in some way with this villa. Here's a picture of the children. And several of them were actually hidden also in the town abbey. This is a picture of the abbey, what it looked like the same thing then, it looks like it now. Another place on their trajectory is Florence. I'm sure some of you have been. Florence was home to, obviously, the Duomo, and a large network of priests and an archbishop named Dalla Costa, who lived next to the Duomo, who was very involved in the underground and in trying to help protect the Jews of Italy. It was also home to a convent across the river on Piazza del Carmine. And there were a lot of events that happened at this convent, which you could read about. But I knew that Lily and Esty would eventually find themselves here, and this is on the back of the book, so it's not too much of a giveaway, but they're posing as nuns, and little Theo's, Esty has a little boy Theo at the beginning of the book, so he's now about 3 years old. By the time they find their way to Florence, and he's, learning his prayers, his Catholic prayers, and they're trying to fit in and kind of wait out the war. And Lily makes 2 trips from this convent to Florence to visit with Dalla Costa, the archbishop. And so I really took my time walking the route and trying to figure out which streets she would have traveled on. So here's my mom. And imagining what it would have felt like to be her. She's once in the daylight and once at night. Once encountering a major roundup and once, kind of running for her life. And so while our walk was very serene and beautiful, it was really helpful to be there and just to look at the different kinds of paving stones, to look at the details of the buildings around me, the sounds, the smells, and try to incorporate, once again, those sensory details into Lily's point of view. And then, of course, there are so many beautiful bridges in Florence, and they were all bombed by the Germans on their way out at the end of the war, except for the Ponte Vecchio, kind of the most famous one, which apparently Hitler deemed too beautiful to destroy. So this would have been Lily's view of the Ponte Vecchio before the Germans left, and then this same view at the end of the war. Another city that I absolutely fell in love with was Assisi. Has anyone been there? Yeah, isn't it gorgeous? It's one of the most picturesque little villages here in the middle in Umbria. And I made there's some stops that we made along the way, and these tiny little towns actually where I read about real families and farmers who were housing Jews that were in need of a safe place to stay. This little tiny idyllic town on the surface could not be quainter or more beautiful. It's lots of little narrow, alleyways and church bells just ringing constantly. That was a detail I loved writing about. It's just a constant sound of church bells, monks walking around every corner. But it was also home to over 300 hidden Jews. So again, Jews hiding in the church, Jews hiding in the homes of civilians. And what I loved as well about this town is it was home to a gentleman named Luigi Brizzi, who was an elderly shopkeeper with a shop full of like tchotchkes that faced the street. And in the back, he had this old Felix, a refurbished printing press. And he was secretly using that press to print false IDs for these Jews in hiding. You can see one of the IDs on the right that he created, one of the stamps that he was using. And he was a part of this whole network. It was called the Assisi Underground, that included some of the local monks, and they were connected with Florence. And he never spoke about it, not even to his family. Like, it was this huge secret. And throughout the war, even though there were Germans stationed in Assisi, there was this whole, I just was so fascinated by it. Beneath the surface, there was this whole world of a network of people trying to help. And one of those people was a very famous cyclist named Gino Bartoli. And Gino, I kept reading this name. I was like, who is this guy? Gino was Italy's golden boy. So he'd won the Tour de France and a bunch of the Italian races. He was literally the country's hero at the start of the war. And it turns out he was shuttling IDs in the frame of his bike between Assisi and Florence. He's Catholic. He had, and he was just out of his generosity of his heart, taking that risk because he figured who would stop him, right? Who would check his bike? Who would think to do that? So I've got several scenes, and if I have time, I'll read one to you where I incorporate Gino into Lily's story. There's another real-life monk named Father Nicacci, and he was at the monastery of San Damiano, which is a little bit outside of town, so you have to go outside the town walls and walk this beautiful, long walk down to the monastery, kind of overlooking these acres and acres of olive trees and patchworks of farms. It's just the most beautiful scene. So I do have moments for Lily where she's like trying to make these decisions about where to go next, and she looks up and she sees this scenery, and I allow her to enjoy the beauty of it in that moment, because I do feel like those little moments are probably what, if it were me at least, and that's what I did constantly, is try to put myself in her shoes, I'd try to appreciate those moments of beauty. And Italy is an easy place for that, right? So she goes to visit Father Nicacci quite often, and it was really cool being there at the monastery. There were monks walking around everywhere, and inside, you could go inside, and there are 2 scenes set around that exact table where Lily and Father Nicacci sit beneath the oil painting of Christ and have conversations about where she should go and what she should do next. Of course, Rome. I couldn't write the book without having her stop in Rome, and this was an interesting place to be in the war, because as the Allies came in, I think most of Italy thought, all right, well, the Allies are here. The war is going to be over soon. Like, let's just wait it out. But this is a map of the ever and gradually changing German lines of defense. So as the Allies slowly pushed their way north, they pushed this line of defense further and further. But it took not months or weeks, but years for them to finally break through. But Lily spent some time in Rome, and for me, it was really fun to have her incorporate all the places that I love in Rome into her story. So there is Piazza Farnese, which is one of my favorite piazzas because it's kind of quiet and sort of next to Campo dei Fiori, off the beaten path a little bit, and it's got these beautiful fountains that were dried up during the war, but I still allowed her to admire them. And it's got my favorite street in all of Rome. If you go, you must visit Via Giulia, which is, she has a stroll, she makes it a part of, she like goes out of her way to walk Via Giulia, and it's got these gorgeous gates that look into these courtyards of these fancy palazzos inside. And again, sort of the juxtaposition of her life of living like day to day on her rations, and then kind of glimpsing this like luxurious life inside these palazzos. We also were lucky enough to be in Rome when the Pope was speaking. So that was a really moving experience. I hope he's doing okay. And I knew there would be a scene where Lily is here with Theo, and she's gathered, and there are hundreds of thousands of people in the piazza at St. Peter's and looking up and kind of listening. It was a powerful moment. Just a couple of my favorite pictures from the city. My mom and I, once again, did not try to eat we indulged in the food, even though that's something Lily didn't have the luxury of. But it was a really beautiful time to be with her and sort of retracing her footsteps while I was retracing or creating and tracing Lily's footsteps as well. In this middle picture is one of the 7 hills, the Ginocolo, I think it's pronounced. And we actually stopped there and spread some of my father's ashes, so he felt like he was there with us as well, and we really honored their time together in Italy. And there is a character who comes into play who is very much inspired by my father, Thomas. Bologna is an important place in that it's home for Lily. This is where she grew up and where her father, Massimo, has an apartment. And I love Bologna. It's one of my favorite cities. It's such a nice size. It's full of these beautiful porticos. The food is unbelievable. It's clean. This is the door to one of the synagogues in the city. It's also one of the cities that was decimated at the war's end. It was occupied till the very last minute by the Germans, and so the Allies actually kept bombing and bombing and bombing and trying to force them out. So this is what the city looked like upon Lily's return at the end of the war. Wild to think. And so I had to constantly ask myself, would she want to go home to this? What would that be like to go home to a city in ruins? It was also home, or is home, to a beautiful old Jewish cemetery where there are also some important scenes. You learn in chapter 1 that Lily's mom has passed, and she's got a headstone in a cemetery here. And this is where I was inspired by the name Pasili, so that's Lily's surname, and the story is Lily Pasili. But again, like noticing what kind of trees were growing and the state of these headstones, and just kind of spending some time in that cemetery was really beautiful. There is also a little encounter with a group of partisans, and I read about these young Jewish women who were joining up with these groups of partisans, often sleeping in the woods, sometimes setting off explosives, sometimes negotiating with the Nazis. I was so inspired by this group and one young woman in particular named Matilda that I knew I would incorporate their story into Lily's at some point. Again, a part of the war I never knew existed, that there were young women, and some of them Jewish women, fighting and resisting in this way. I was really inspired by them. I was also, I'll give you a quick backstory on Esti. So I decided that Esti would be from the island of Rhodes, and that was partly because, in Greece, and that was partly because when I was, I was pregnant with my first, so it must have been about 14 years ago. My father-in-law and my husband Robert and I, we went to the Greek Isles, and we ended up on this tiny island of Rhodes. Has anyone been? You've been? Have you been to the synagogue there? No. So we stumbled upon this synagogue, which turns out is one of the oldest in Greece. And there was a gentleman there, and he started telling me a little bit about the history. And sadly, Greece's history is horrific. Like, the percentage of Jews lost was nearly that of Poland's. But he told me about this village and what it was like to live there, and started filling me in on the history. And I didn't know at the time I would incorporate it into a book, but I think it stayed with me, and this is what the synagogue looks like today. It's beautiful. And so I knew I really liked the idea of trying to bring, again, a little bit of Rhodes, and then there's a character also from Salonika, so I try to bring a little bit of that Greek history into Lily's story as well. I also met a woman named Stella Levy, who I think her book is called, there's a book written on her called 100 Saturdays, where a gentleman sat down with her and interviewed her for 100 Saturdays in a row and told to get her story down about what it was like to be a little girl growing up Jewish on the island of Rhodes. And so when I heard her speak and she started talking about what it was like to jump off of the pier and run with her feet in the sand, her little like what she was wearing, and all the different kind of cultures that blended together, the Spanish culture and the Greek culture. I was so moved by her story, and so a lot of Esti's upbringing, she's a little bit of a wild child, was inspired by that encounter with Stella. And then I just have to make a little nod to my two boys. It was really rewarding to write a book about a little boy. I mean, at its core, it's a story of friendship, but there's a strong theme of motherhood and what it means to sort of step into that role of surrogate mother as well. And these are actually pictures of us on our research for We Were the Lucky Ones when we drove the Adriatic coast, and we stopped in a little village called Rimini, which makes an appearance in Lily's story, and also Bari, which is an important place in my family's story. But being there with Wyatt at the time, and having raised two little boys made bringing Theo's character to life feel that much more real, and honestly made it harder to write in some ways. And I remember having the same feeling writing about Felicia and We Were the Lucky Ones, my great aunt, and imagining what it was like to be a little kid in these years where you're on the run, or you're in hiding, or you're being asked to pretend to be someone you're not. And then on the flip side of that, what it meant to be a mother or a caretaker and having to make these decisions, sometimes by the hour, of what to do, where to go, who to entrust your child with, and every decision a sliding doors moment that could end in life or death. And for me, that was a really big theme in the story, is how we make those decisions in times that are extraordinary. Like I describe the book often as an ordinary woman forced to live through this extraordinary moment in history, where there's so much weight on each of those decisions. How do you do that? And I don't know the answer, but I tried my best to imagine. And I think for a lot of the decisions that Lily makes are like kind of decisions that I would have made. And a lot of Theo is Wyatt and his younger brother Ransom. I was also so inspired by the people in my life today. Researching We Were the Lucky Ones was not easy, but the plot was there for me. The characters, you can call them characters, my relatives were there. I just had to uncover the story. In One Good Thing, I did all the research and I understood the history, but then I got to make up the characters and make up the plot, so where they would go. So I found myself doing the thing that I know how to do, which is rely on real people. So for Lily, that was a bit of me. Also, a lot of, if you read the book, We Were the Lucky Ones, or watched the series, there's an aunt named Bella. She's my great uncle Jacob's wife. And there was something about her character, and not only her character, but Eva Filer, who plays Bella in the series. There was something about her essence and her soul that was just like so Lily. And fun side note, Eva reads the narration for One Good Thing. So if you're audio listeners, she's wonderful. She's so good. She's British and just the most soulful and empathetic and beautiful human I know. So I had her in my head a lot of times when I was writing Lily, and also my experience in making the series, which was very helpful because I could visualize how scenes might unfold, or how, with dialogue you can say less with more. And then for Esty, I had my great aunt Helena, who was like the fiery one, the defiant one, the one who was very big and bold and courageous and never took no for an answer. So that was really fun to draw on her personality. I had my boys. There's an American soldier who is my father and a little bit of my husband. So it was really a beautiful process for me to draw from the people who I know and love. And I think that theme of love is also what got me through a lot of the writing. And it sort of bubbled to the surface as I was bringing this story to life in a way that I didn't really intentionally mean for it to. And it sort of did the same in We Were the Lucky Ones. It's family coming together. This was friends. The love between Esty and her best friend, Lily and her best friend Esty. The love between Lily and young Theo. The love between Lily and her father. Love between this young American soldier who she meets. So I think, for me, I think often about how love, if it's even the deep-rooted kind or the new and unexpected kind, can sometimes be the thing that motivates us and inspires us to keep going. So that was my thread throughout. Do I have time to read like a quick passage before we're done? Okay, so I will just read. I had a lot of fun in this scene, incorporating the cyclist, Gino Bartoli. So I can tell I was a little bit obsessed with him. And there are books written on him. Like people have devoted literature to him, but I wanted him to have a really cool couple cameos. And Lily doesn't really know who he is at first. She runs into him once at a monastery, the monastery in Assisi. And then she and Theo go on the run. So here we are in we are in March of 1944. And Esty has asked Lily to do the unfathomable, which is to protect her son while she can't. So Lily sets off on this epic journey south towards what she hopes is freedom having to make decisions day by day about whether to walk and risk an Allied bomb falling on her head or take a train and risk a Nazi checkpoint, but she's trying to get as far south as she can, hopefully to the Allies or at least to Rome, which she hopes will be, is technically a free city actually, and which she hopes will be safer than staying in the north under occupied territory. So she and Theo are on the road. They're on their walking portion, and Lily's kind of let her guard down for a moment, and she's having one of those moments where she is admiring the scenery. They've stopped. They've broken into their little bag of provisions. They're having a snack. She's thinking about her father, and Theo interrupts her thoughts and says, "Someone's coming," Theo whispers. He jabs her with an elbow, and Lily's smile vanishes. Theo points. There. Sure enough, a man approaching on a bicycle. Careless, Lily chides, straightening. Had she been paying better attention, they might have slipped behind the juniper, but it's too late for that now. She stands, tense a hand over her eyes as the figure nears. He moves at an alarmingly fast pace. Lily scans the road behind him to see if anyone is chasing him, but he's alone. He slows as he nears. "It's him," Theo cries, "the man from before in the snow." And sure enough, Lily realizes, it is. The cyclist brakes to a stop on the side of the road and waves. For as fast as he'd been riding, Lily notices he's barely broken a sweat. "Buongiorno," he says. "Hello," Lily says. "Hello," Theo says. "I thought I recognized you," the cyclist tells Lily. "That purple coat. We met in Assisi, right, at the monastery?" "We did." "In the snow," Theo says. "That's right. It was a cold ride home." He turns to Lily. "You're a friend of Father Nicacci's, yes?" "I am, just recently so. You as well?" "Certo, although we go way back. I'm Gino," the cyclist says. So it's true. "I'm Lily, and this is my son Theo. It's an honor to meet you, Gino. My father's a big fan." "Well, that makes my day," Gino says, grinning. "I like your bike," Theo says. "Thank you, young man. How old are you?" Theo waggles his 3 middle fingers. 3, so old. My son Andrea is 2. You remind me of him. "This is my racing bike. Would you like to have a closer look?" Theo glances up at Lily and she nods. He approaches the bike and Lily listens in as Gino points out its various parts: the saddle, the pump holder, the toe straps, brakes, stem, hubs, the double left axle caps. "It's so dirty," Theo observes. "Theo," Lily scolds. Even though he's right, the bike's frame is caked with mud. Gino laughs. "Normally, it's much cleaner. We had a run-in a few weeks ago with a bomber." Theo's eyes widen. "You did?" "Well, the bike did. Lucky for me, I wasn't riding at the time." "Where were you?" "I was in Perugia, having a coffee. I leaned her up against the outside wall of the cafe, and the reflection of her frame in the sun must have caught the pilot's attention." "And then what happened?" Theo asked. "Well," Gino says, glancing at Lily, "he missed the bike, thankfully, but the cafe, let's just say he left his mark." "In broad daylight?" Lily asks, glancing overhead. "No one was hurt, thankfully. After that, I figured I'd better make sure she wasn't so shiny." He pats the frame of his bike, then looks to Lily. "They fly over often, the Allies." "I'm aware," Lily says. So that's just a little sort of, thank you. I thought that was sort of a fun example of how I kind of blended history with my creative license of how I imagined a scene like that could unfold, and also an example of how much, it's hard to say how much fun I had because it's a Holocaust novel, but those moments where I allowed Theo just to be a kid and Lily to have this awe of this famous cyclist, before the bombs start falling from the sky, I feel like it was, the book is kind of a mix of the two, the light and the dark, and so I really enjoyed writing those light moments. Shall I open it up to Q&A? Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay.
And
thank you.
now the time has come for you to get your questions answered. So if you do have a question for Georgia, please raise your hand and we will bring the mic over to you.
In total, how long did it take you to research this book?
Oh gosh, so 3 or 4 years. It's a little blurry because COVID happened, and because I started working on the TV series for We Were the Lucky Ones, and so I was doing both at the same time. And it made for a little bit of an extra challenge as far as deadlines go. Certainly COVID, I had started with the bones of a story that are actually pretty different from what you'll read if you pick it up, and then I had to set it aside for a long while we tried to juggle 2 little kids at home and work. But start to finish, it was 5 years, but the research part, I mean, interestingly, I think that the travel and everything, that was super helpful, but you can kind of research nonstop online. I mean, it's amazing how many records are digitalized and how many details you can find about, and to me, that's what I love to do, the historical fiction, that's where it comes in, is all those colorful details. So it could be a never-ending process. So I was definitely researching up till the very end as I was writing some of those more colorful scenes.
And we're in the back of the auditorium.
Would you be willing to share how you do your process of writing and kind of how you create the timelines and how you keep track of everything?
Yeah, absolutely. I love the research, and I'm a big timeline person to keep track of well, certainly with We Were the Lucky Ones, it was a lot to keep track of who was where and when. So I had 7 different storylines, 12, I think, because even spouses, is split up. With One Good Thing, it was more I created the timeline of history, so what was happening, and then I wove Lily's narrative through that. So that was, I always I have that sort of as my backbone. And it was so helpful in We Were the Lucky Ones, actually having that historical context kind of woven into the personal narrative, that I decided to actually include some of those snippets of history in between chapters. With One Good Thing, the scope was so much narrower, and just being able to get into one protagonist's head, heart and mind, I didn't feel like I needed it. And then, yeah, I mean, my practice is just, I know I'm the most creative in the morning, so I would usually carve out mornings for the creative writing process, and then afternoons for research and editing. That worked really well for me, yeah.
And we're in the back of the auditorium again.
Okay.
So I'm assuming, because I don't like to assume, because you know what that makes, that this book totally relates as far as you can feel the emotion itself. But then again, when doing your writing, how did you separate your passion and your emotion while writing it, writing your book at the same time without getting too emotional? Does that make sense?
No, I can't say I did. I mean, I definitely got emotional with it. And I think the hardest part was writing some of the really, really hard, dark, horrific scenes. And you do have to separate in that moment. And it's really hard. You have to both imagine what it would feel like to be there and then communicate that without, breaking down in tears or anger or whatever emotion that, or overdoing it. Yeah, absolutely. I do try not to overwrite or overemphasize. I always, my lens is like, simplicity is always better. And for me, it's how I would respond. And maybe because I'm kind of an even-keeled person, it's like how I would respond in a situation. But it is hard to separate, and especially the scenes with Theo, like for me, and knowing, like, what if it were my kid? It was really challenging at times to separate, and to try not to. I do feel strongly in my own writing that I don't ever want to try to prove a point. I want to just tell a human story and then let my readers take away what they will from it.
And we're still in the back here.
Hi. If I recall correctly, you studied psychology
I
in
did,
college,
yeah.
but I'm curious, what drew you to writing books, and how has that propelled you? I'm very curious about that.
Yeah, I know. Psychology, I feel like it applies to everything, kind of, right? And certainly character development, and I'm just so curious about humans and how we think and behave. I didn't know I was going to do this for a living by any means, but I did grow up in a home where my father was a writer, so some of my earliest memories were the sound of his typewriter, like when I was like 3, and then when I was 5, his first book came out. And so I remember holding that book and thinking as a kid, oh, you can write books. Now I know how hard that is. But when it's instilled at you at such a young age that people can do this, I feel very lucky in that sense. My mother's also a beautiful writer, so I think I grew up thinking I could do it. But I loved just personal journaling and writing about a trip when I came back from it. And maybe I'd write an article here or there or take a creative writing class in college. But it wasn't until we were the lucky ones that's not true. I did try my hand at, I still write now and then I do copywriting, so like for a marketing firm, but that's very different from novel writing. So we were the lucky ones really sparked that interest, and I think it was, I really wanted to tell the story, first of all, as truthfully as I could to preserve it, the legacy of the family, and I also wanted to tell it in a way that my kids and their kids and so on could relate to it. And so that drew me into the world of storytelling and I think historical fiction, the genre, and trying to bring this history to life in a way that felt not dusty or sepia-toned, but relevant and modern.
We're in the middle of the auditorium, and then we'll head down to the front.
Yeah, hi. I think you said that you were about 15 when you generally became aware that you were from a family of Holocaust survivors. I wondered if you might feel comfortable sharing what exactly the circumstances were and how you found out.
Sure, yeah. It was thanks to a high school English assignment. So I was a junior in high school, and my English teacher said, go out and interview a relative and learn a little bit about your roots and in turn about yourself. And so my grandfather, Addie, who you meet in chapter 1 of We Were the Lucky Ones, had passed away the year before. And so I sat with my grandmother, Caroline, and it was over the course of that interview that his story came to light. And I don't think it was a big, deep, dark secret in our family history. It wasn't like he was so charismatic and forward-thinking and protective of his family, but he was the only one of his siblings who'd married out of the Jewish faith. He had perfect American, his English accent was perfect. He had Americanized his name from Addie Courts, K-U-R-C, to C-O-U-R-T-S, like the English spelling. So I just never thought to ask, and he didn't dwell on it. He was not a look back kind of guy. So that discovery at 15 sparked a lot of curiosity and a lot of questions.
And we're down in the front of the auditorium here.
How close are we coming to going in that direction, and what do you see as ways that we can avoid this?
I know. It feels like we're close. I never would have thought when I set out in 2008 for my research for We Were the Lucky Ones, for my family ancestry project. It was 2008 when I started interviewing. And if you had told me then that the theme of my story in 2017 and in 2023 when the series came out, that it would feel so relevant, I wouldn't have believed you. This book was written more so in this time period where it's like the statistics are horrifying in terms of not only the anti-Semitism, but how few people actually know about the Holocaust. I think that it's like half of people under 40 don't even know about it. So you combine that with this growing anti-Semitism, and it's terrifying. And I think there's never been a more important time to tell stories, whatever they are, and whatever medium they are, but to bring people into the hearts and minds of those who experienced that type of dehumanization firsthand, and to see what can come of it. And so I was telling somebody earlier tonight, I'm doing a lot of speaking at schools right now, and I feel like that's such a crucial audience of like young people to reach, not only because I discovered this at 15 and the whole process of the research to the book, to the script, to the screenplay is interesting for kids, but it's a way for them to step into the shoes and hearts and minds of these regular people who are just like them, whose lives, were completely destroyed or turned upside down. So it feels like we're scarily close and like we're stepping back in time. And I hope that's not the case, but I hope that in telling the stories, we spark understanding, and in understanding can come empathy. And I think we need more empathy than ever right now.
Thank you for those sobering and inspiring thoughts, Georgia. We have time for one final question, but before we do, just a reminder that the evening doesn't end here. We are also having a book signing out on the bridge after the program. So please run out, grab your copy of the book from Majors and Quinn Booksellers. They're out there selling books. Both We Were the Lucky Ones and the new book, The One Good Thing. So grab your copies of the books and go get them signed. And with that, we have our final question.
Many thanks for all of your comments and sharing your process with us. I really enjoyed it. Obviously, One Good Thing has to be high up on my list of things to read, but I'm wondering if you could share with us something that you've been enjoying reading this year.
Oh, that is such a good question. Right now I'm reading the book Orbital. Who can tell me the author? Because I can't remember. Samantha Harvey. It is kind of out there for me. It is so beautifully written. It's about a group of astronauts who are up in space and they circle the Earth 16 times a day. I've just started it. I needed something really zen to read at night, and it's fitting the bill, and the language is so beautiful, and it also makes you, it's such an interesting perspective. It makes you also wonder how you would feel and act and if you were one of those astronauts on this ship where everything happens 16 times a day. So that's what I'm reading right now, and I'm loving it. I also read a galley, which is like, it's coming out in May, called The Names by Florence Knapp, K-N-A-P-F maybe, or P, and it's also kind of different for me. I get sent a lot of Holocaust novels, as you can probably imagine, so I really appreciate them and read them, a lot of them, and then every now and then I branch out, and so this was another one that it's really interesting. It's how a name can change your fate. So it's 3 parallel storylines told from the perspectives of a mom who has the decision of what to name her child. I don't want to spoil anything, but The Names, check it out. Thank you so much. And if you have another question, bring it to the table and ask me. I'm happy to answer. Thank you.